I think I might have witnessed the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, but no one believes me. Written by Yevra Yimris on r/nosleep. I work as an assistant to the county medical examiner in blank County, Kansas. This is just a fancy way of saying that I work the night shift in the morgue. The other night, a case came in that you are not going to believe. I mean, the cops didn't believe me, so why would you? My friend Bobby, an EMT, gave me the heads up while they were en route. It was about 11:30 p.m. I had been on shift for about 30 minutes, putting her about the examination room, when the radio crackled to life.
Unit 4, ME. You copy? Over?
ME, this is blank. Is that you, Bobby?
Yeah, I'm bringing you a doozy.
What do you got?
Teen involved in some kind of chemical accident.
Special preps?
Dunno, maybe a bucket. This guy has a bag of bloody bones.
Great. I'll put on heavy-duty gloves.
See you soon. Unit 4, over and out.
I busied myself prepping a gurney and heading down to the ER to greet the ambulance. I didn't have long to wait. They must not have been very far out when Bobby had called. They pulled up into the roundabout, and Bobby and Sheila jumped out of the cab and met me around the back of the vehicle. Bobby popped up to the back of the van, and the two of them slid out the gurney, dropped the wheels and lined it up with the one I'd brought from the hospital. Bobby nodded the bloody bag. Give me a hand with this. I moved to the other end, and we each grabbed and heaved. The bag was surprisingly light and flexible. There was a dull rattle as we set it on the other gurney. What the hell? I muttered. You're telling me, agreed Bobby. Not much left of this kid. A pile of bloody bones by the time we got there. What the hell happened? Kid was dicking around at the sinkhole over on blank. Cops say he was overcome by some corrosive gas. Never seen anything like it. I looked up at Bobby. He'd been an EMT for a long time and had seen just about everything. His face was pale and held my gaze rather than look down at the bloody bag. Sheila had already run into the lobby to get coffee for them. You okay? Bobby shrugged. Yeah, I'll be okay. Just can't shake this feeling Screw it, I'll be fine once I get some coffee in me. Bobby helped me wheel the gurney through the sliding ER doors. I checked in at the reception and filled out the required paperwork for a DOA. I said my goodbyes to Sheila and Bobby, and we parted ways. I whistled to myself tunelessly as I pushed the rolling bed down the long hall towards the staff elevator. As I waited in the empty hall, we remained a skeleton crew after 12 a.m. on weekdays. I noticed an odd smell, something like burning, rotting leaves. It had to be coming from the body, but usually these bags blocked out most of the smells, at least until they were opened. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and I wheeled in my most recent client. I punched the button for the basement and waited impatiently as the old rumbling elevator took me down. The basement was as quiet as, well, a morgue, I suppose. I was usually the only one down here until housekeeping came through around 4. I was used to it though and enjoyed the solitude. I pushed the gurney into the exam room and up against the main table. I figured I'd do my best to get the body in order. I put it on ice to await Doc Corrigan's arrival in the morning for the autopsy. I put on a pair of heavy-duty latex gloves and unzipped the body bag. A nauseating bust of putrefied air escaped from the bag. The overwhelming stench of rotting flesh and burning leaves assaulted my nostrils. A smell that shouldn't be present in a fresh corpse. For the first time in my career as a morgue attendant, I almost regurgitated the cold-cut combo I'd had for supper. Somehow managing to regain control of my stomach contents, as the odor began to dissipate, I examined the body I had been given. Bobby had been accurate in his description. The body was little more than damp bones covered in streaks of blood and what might be half-dissolved muscle tissue and skin. The internal organs were completely missing unless some of the discolored streaks represented what was left of them. I removed the skull first. It dripped gore and I double-checked my gloves to make sure the remnants of the corrosive wasn't eating through them. They seemed fine. The skull was devoid of any features but for a small pool of gray liquid that might once have been a brain. I sat at the head of the table. As I turned back to the bag, I heard a creak and turned back to see the empty eye sockets of the skull staring directly at me. I nearly jumped out of my skin and went into full panic mode before I realized I had not affixed the screws that would hold it into place, and I had simply become unbalanced. Why the hell was I so jumpy? I realigned the skull and fixed the screws, secure in the knowledge it wouldn't move again, before turning back to the bag. The spine was surprisingly intact. It seemed to be held together by a dark, gummy substance running up the center that might have been the spinal cord. I laid the backbone on the table and attached it to the skull with temporary elastic fasteners. As I turned back to the black bag, I realized I was humming Dem Bones. Now that the odor had dissipated, and I was over my initial shock, the project of reassembling the skeletal remains of the unfortunate teenager became a fascinating puzzle. I set to work in earnest, occasionally singing snatches of Dem Bones out loud. I worked diligently for almost 3 hours. I had retrieved every bone that was in the bag. Every bone, that is, except one. The left ulna was completely missing. Nowhere could I find it in the bag. I drained the liquid that remained in the bag into a gallon-sized glass jar. The multicolored goo filled the jar about 3/4 full. Still, I could find no left ulna. Strange. It was completely unlike Bobby and Sheila to leave anything at the scene of an accident. But then again, usually the bodies were intact. I resolved to radio Bobby about it, but right now it was 3 a.m. Time for a smoke break and a can of soda. I unfolded a paper drape and pulled it up over the skeletal remains. I went upstairs and outside. I walked across the street to the 24-hour McDonald's, retrieving a half-pack full of Pall Malls in the hoodie pocket, shaking a cig loose, and pulling it free from pursed lips. I lit the cigarette and stood in the McDonald's parking lot, puffing my life away. I had to smoke at the Mickey D's parking lot because the hospital didn't allow smoking on the grounds. Yeah, I know these things are going to kill me, but bad habits are hard to break. I finished the cigarette, crushing the remnants beneath the ball of my foot, and went inside to purchase a Dr. Pepper, sipping on the soda. I started back across the street towards the hospital. I stopped in the middle of the crosswalk, halfway across the street. I had the overwhelming sense that something was watching me. I stood there frozen, not daring to look around. A honking car horn brought me out of it, and I hurried on across. Once back in the hospital, the sensation left me, and I shook myself. Weird. I hurried back down to the morgue exam room. I needed to put the skeleton back on ice before it started to smell in earnest. I threw open the door and flipped on the lights. I stopped short. The skeleton was sitting upright on the examination table. Its legs hung over the side. Its face away from me, its hands resting on the table on either side. I froze again. What the fuck? Was this someone's idea of a joke? My heart damn near stopped. I glanced around the room, but no one else was there. I stuck my head back in the hall. "Ha ha, Ernest, you got me. Good one," I called, but there was no response. I looked back toward the skeleton and my breath caught in my throat. Something back and sinuous wove in and out and around the bones. It was the substance from the spine, spreading like a growth of dark ivy and long dark fingers. It clung to the bones and articulated the limbs. Suddenly, the skeleton jumped off the table, the bones of its heels clattering on the white tile of the exam room. I let out an involuntary gasp, and the thing that had been a teenage boy turned toward me. The first thing my paralyzed mind noticed was the empty eye sockets were filled with 2 balls of luminous green gas. Jesus fuck, what the fuck? I backpedaled the door and slammed it shut. Now what? I ran for the elevator and punched the button rapidly. I know that doesn't help, but I was very close to full-blown panic attack. I heard a pounding and scraping on the morgue door. It didn't seem the thing knew how to work a doorknob, but somehow I didn't think that would hold it long. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the elevator arrived. I jumped in and slammed the hand down on the closed door button, heart pounding. I hit the button for the first floor. I needed to notify security. I ran down the hall towards the security office, just off of emergency. I dodged an orderly and a nurse who both looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I burst in the office, startling Phil into dropping his styrofoam cup of coffee on the floor. Jesus blank, what the hell? Phil, something is loose in the morgue. What? He asked, dumbfounded as he got down to mop up the spilled coffee. Leave that, damn it. Come on, you gotta see it to believe it. I began pulling on his uniform sleeve. The slight, paunchy, middle-aged security guard got awkwardly to his feet. Okay, but if you're yanking my chain, I'll wrap you up in the side of the head. I sprinted back down the hall towards the elevator, much to the chagrin of the resident on duty. Phil followed after me at a sedated pace, but fortunately, he arrived about the same time as the elevator came. We go in and punch the button for a basement level, looking sidelong at Phil. "You got your piece?" He patted the holster that was half concealed by his belly. "I've got it, won't need it, but I've got it." The elevator door opened and I darted a glance in both directions. When I caught sight of the morgue entrance, I paused. "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit," I muttered. "What?" asked Phil, stepping into the hallway. "The door to the morgue is open." "So, you probably just didn't shut it all the way." He started down the hall towards the exam room. I followed a half a step behind, knowing full well that I closed that door and made sure it latched. Before I could stop him, Phil stepped into the exam room. "God damn it, man!" he roared, and I stepped into the room in time to see him slam a ham fist down on the table. "You scare me half to death, spill my coffee, and lead me on a wild goose chase?" He turned to glare at me, his brow wrinkled in an irritated scowl. "There's no one here, fool." He was right. I looked around the exam room, and the skeleton was nowhere to be seen. There was barely any indication that we had ever been there. I indicated the empty body bag on the gurney. "I swear to God, I saw what I saw. Do you really think Bobby and Sheila brought me an empty bag?" Phil picked at the empty bag, wrinkling his nose at the slight, lingering smell. Then he turned toward me, narrowing his eyes. "You high, boy?" "What? No! Besides, weed doesn't cause hallucinations." "Somebody's pranking you. They probably already put the body in one of the cold chambers." He started walking that way, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait!" I had noticed something out of place. The door to Mrs. Wilkinson's chamber was slightly ajar. "I know I didn't leave that drawer open." "Nonsense, boy!" Phil pulled my grasp and moved over to the cold chambers. "Let's see what we got here." He yanked on the handle and slid out the door. He stumbled backwards, yammering nonsensically. Mrs. Wilkins was still on the slab, but she wasn't alone. Crouched atop her body, pressed in close, was a skeleton I had been examining only an hour ago. Its bony fingers were locked tight around the dead woman's neck. Tendrils of black ooze extended from their hands and snaked into the ears of the corpse. Even from where I stood, I could see that they pulsed rhythmically. A third, thicker tendril? Tube? Tentacle? Extruded from the mouth hole of the skeletal creature and buried itself in the stomach of the dead old woman. It too pulsed in a sucking motion. Phil was fumbling for his sidearm, but you can tell he wasn't used to pulling it. You know how in old movies, when they animated skeletons, they move in a blocky, clumsy manner? This thing didn't move like that at all. It leaped at Phil with cat-like grace, knocking him prone. Then it jumped again, clear over me on the exam table before bolting out the door. I helped Phil to his feet as he finally got his gun unholstered. His normally dark face looked 3 shades paler, and I'm pretty sure he'd gone green. He stared back and forth between old lady Wilkinson and the door through which the creature had fled. "What the hell was that?" "That, my friend," I said, shaking visibly, "was the patient that Bobby and Sheila brought me this evening." "Nah," said Phil, slowly regaining his composure. "That was some kind of animal." Already his mind was doing that thing human minds do when faced with the impossible. "I better go after it, make sure it doesn't hurt anybody." Before I could stop him, Phil was already heading out the door. He turned his head back as he left. "Make sure you clean up in here and figure out what happened to these bones." Phil went hunting the animal, and I turned toward poor Mrs. Wilkinson. A cursory investigation implied her brains and gut had been liquefied. I'd leave a note for Dr. Corrigan so he could do an examination when he came in. There was no finding the missing bones. They were running about the hospital somewhere. I marked the jar of fluids I'd collected as unknown and put it in cold storage. That would have to be tested. It's all we had of the dead kid. I busied myself with the necessary paperwork and waited nervously for my shift to end. Phil returned just as my shift was ending. His gun was holstered and he looked flustered and out of breath. "Lost it," he panted. "Damn thing is fast. Whatever it is. Some kind of monkey, maybe. Think I saw it on the roof of the McDonald's across the street." He plopped himself down in a chair by the counter on one side of the exam room. "Don't go anywhere. You and I are due downtown to make a statement to the police. You ever find the bones?" You know, I didn't. I wish I could make him understand. Try as I might, I could not believe what I'd seen as was an animal. Creature must have run off with him. Something like that, I agreed. Did he eat much of the dead broad? Mrs. Wilkinson. No, not much. I couldn't believe I was having this conversation. That's good. At least. Come on, let's get this over with. I tried to tell the police the truth, but they didn't believe me. I eventually accepted their explanation that I must have fallen asleep when I woke up, saw the monkey, and confused it with a nightmare. It was the only way that they'd let me leave. But that's bullshit. I know what I saw. That creature, the walking, leaping nightmare of a skeleton, was out there. Somewhere.